Hello, Donnie Pemick here with Omnis Technologies. Again, I'm here with Hunter Ford
Right.
and Zach Ball. And today we're going to talk about passwords and maybe if you should have a password policy, what a good password looks like versus a pretty weak one, and maybe just some general tips and tricks to make sure that you have a strong password and your accounts don't get compromised. So, I guess just to kind of kick things off, what would you say is an example of, say, a terrible password?
Password, Pass,
Password, the word password, all
capital
lowercase.
P with a 1.
Okay, at least a capital P.
Yes.
Something with like your name or just a generic set of numbers in it, especially any numbers that are in order.
Like consecutive, like one,
Yeah.
two, three, four, or something like
Or
that.
doing something like QE, QWERTY, or whatever, like keyboard.
Right, the first however many keys. Okay.
Most services have a built-in reinforcement that it has to be complex enough to even be accepted.
Right.
At this point, I mean, any good service enforces password complexity.
Right. So what would you say is a good length overall? So let's say that the system you're using doesn't have very strong password policy when you sign up. What's a good like minimum length that you should have for a password? Number of characters.
I'd say 10 or more.
10 or more. Okay. Hunter.
The bare minimum for most services is 8 characters, one capital, one number, one symbol.
Right.
I would prefer 10 plus, like Zach said. It's just the longer it is, the more secure it is, just from a being able to crack it sort of perspective.
So a common complaint that we get, or at least pushback on having a complex password is, well, I'm never going to remember it. If I just have to jot it down and put it on a sticky note on my monitor or something, what's the point of me having a strong password? So what would maybe be some tips that you could share for creating a strong password that somebody will remember?
For password creation, I would say using a passphrase is good, where you kind of pick out 4 words that you don't normally see together and kind of force yourself to memorize that. You don't even have to add too much complexity to it. The length itself gives it more security.
And I would imagine also if it's like 4 words and they're, like you said, you don't typically use them together, just having 4 separate words is pretty complex as it is.
Right, and I've even seen some pretty good tips where it comes to like maybe use a poem that you like or something is that sticks in your brain, but isn't common.
Okay, so like maybe even lyrics from a song, like your favorite
Yes.
few lyrics from a song intermixed with capitals and numbers and things.
Yeah, and you can add complexity by substituting symbols and numbers. That adds a little bit of complexity, but with how common it is now, it is easier to catch, I guess.
Right, if it's a song lyric, especially you can probably somebody who's doing kind of like a brute force attack could easily pull popular song lyrics. and
Right,
try to
right.
generate. Okay, how about you? Any thoughts on setting up or tips for setting up a complex password that you'll remember?
I'm one of those people that I still use a name, but then I change the number, but then you change the E's with threes, the A's with ats, and the I's with ones. I just have gotten more complex with the number and then what characters are used after the number.
Okay,
So my Google password I think is 15 with a name that I've used forever, but a 5-digit number that only I know and use most of the time.
right.
So there is ways to do it. It's just trying to find the right combination that it's easily rememberable. Because that is one of the biggest complaints we have. People will stick it on a sticky note. Now, sticking it on a sticky note isn't necessarily bad because someone's going to have to be at your computer
Right.
to steal it.
Right.
But someone online is obviously not going to be able to do that. Having a complex password is one of the simplest and effective ways of keeping people out.
Right, right.
And the path of least resistance doesn't work for us anymore.
Yep. Just takes one time somebody getting into your account so they can not only do a lot of damage to your business, but if it's your personal account, you know, you could lose your identity or somebody can steal your identity and screw up your credit and do all sorts of nasty things. And passwords, like you said, kind of first line of defense. So gotta have something complex.
It's sort of like an avalanche too, because once they get into one account, they can usually use context clues and things to break into multiple other accounts, especially if you use similar passwords or just the same password for multiple accounts.
Right. So what are you guys' views on using a password generator or a password manager? There's things like 1Password and other applications that can do it.
I've used password generators a lot in the past, especially when it comes to if you have to create an account for someone, but they have to have a set password when you give it to them, they don't get to set one themselves. A lot of password generators now, it'll create it and it'll give you some basically like context clues and stuff like that for remembering it, which I think is useful. And then a lot of the password storage, they've seen a lot of growth, I would say. There's a lot of good options now. Google Chrome has a built-in one. It's encrypted. You have to have the master Google password to get to any of your other passwords. And then you can even set up two-factor authentication with it.
Right. So yeah, let's touch on two-factor authentication a little bit. So just the notion is you go to a site that maybe you're not on a trusted PC or you haven't verified that that's a personal PC yet. You enter your password and then you need to get some sort of notification, right, to verify a code. Usually it's like a six number code or something. They'll text it to you or they'll email it to you, and some will even call you with a code if you don't have the other two options. You guys recommend getting that set up?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So any extra layer of protection just to verify that it's actually you logging in is important.
Especially with healthcare information, I believe HIPAA requires two-factor authentication with anything that deals with patient files, or if you work in an organization like a provider of any kind of medical anything, you have to have two-factor on your emails.
Okay, good. Well, that's and we use it. We use it here. We recommend our clients use it. It's very quick and efficient, so it's not like you're sitting there waiting for the code to come. You try and log in, and you immediately get a text message with the code. You punch in the code, and you're good to go. And just verifies that it's actually you trying to log in. So, what do you think is a good minimum viable password policy for businesses? So just moving beyond the home or individual person, the business should put in place these minimum requirements for their people's passwords.
Microsoft has actually pushed this, so even on the server side, the client side, we've set up a lot of Windows 10 machines. They require a password now. You have to put in a password with 3 questions to recover that password.
Okay.
So I believe Microsoft's is 8 characters, 1 capital, 1 number, and I don't know if it requires. I don't think it requires a number, but the companies are starting to push it anyway. I would go back to at least 8 characters with what Hunter was saying: capital, special character, and a number.
For one of our clients, we actually we're in the process of implementing a new password policy where we are forcing I believe by default it's 8-character limit, but what a lot of companies don't know is if they have like Google Apps or OneDrive, they give you a lot of control over the password policy, and you have to go in there and actually adjust those settings. This client didn't have anything set up for password policy, so they could repeat passwords and they just never expired. So we implemented a policy of every 3 months they have to reset it to a new password they've never used, and it has to be a complex password, which means 8 characters, letter, number, symbol, uppercase.
Right. Combination of upper and lower
Yep.
case. Okay. So that would be what you would recommend for any business that is capable, that has a system in place where they can enforce a password policy,
Right.
domain environment or something like that.
Yeah. And if they have the ability to do two-factor authentication, then definitely do it.
Okay, good. So how often, I think you mentioned maybe every 3 months or so, this business is going to, everyone's going to have to change their password to something new.
Right.
3 months, the absolute minimum, should it be sooner than that, or is 3 months a good number to go by?
I think it depends on the business. With most businesses that don't deal with a lot of personal information, I think 3 to 6 months is safe. Whereas in the healthcare field, or where there's a lot of personal information in the mix, you could do it as early as every 90 days. I've worked for some companies where in IT specifically, they require it every 90 days or every 30 days, because those passwords, well, those accounts, they have so much access, they have to continuously just be on the up and up when it comes to passwords, and because getting access to something like that could be very bad.
Sure, the data is very sensitive.
Correct.
I mean, on the personal side, I change my Google apps every 6 months religiously. I don't even question. I just do it.
Right.
And yeah, it's a pain, but
And if you take into consideration you're an IT professional, so for the most part you know when you see something come through that's suspicious that you shouldn't click on and
Right.
things like that. So if an IT professional is saying I change my personal password, every 6 months, the average user should definitely be doing it probably every 3 or so.
Yeah. A lot of services require a password reset every 6 months or maybe every year. But I know like Gmail doesn't when it comes to personal email
Right.
unless they see if they see activity that's strange on your account. But it's good to keep the up and up on that sort of thing if you want to keep everything safe, basically. Especially if you use Google's password storage, you should definitely be resetting it often.
Right. Well, this, has been extremely helpful. I think anybody who watches this video is going to gain some good insights on, especially business owners. What should they enforce for a password policy, and really what are the best practices? And, I think the unfortunate thing is most of them probably already know this, right? Like most of them fundamentally know that they should be changing their password. They should have a strong password. But hopefully some of the tips that we gave will help them, integrate phrases and things that are easier to
Right.
remember, swapping out characters, E's for threes and stuff like that to make their passwords stronger. So, any final thoughts?
While implementation might get pushback, it's really important to have these security kind of policies in place when it comes to passwords.
Right, absolutely. And like we said earlier, password is kind of your first line of defense. It seems like trivial. It's just a password to get into my computer or whatever system, but it only takes somebody breaking that password once to cause a ton of damage for the business or the individual. So, all right, great conversation, guys. So stick with Omnis Technologies. We'll have another video for you next week. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. We'd be happy to help. Thanks.